Welcome everyone to this next episode of Coffee with Sales Engineers. As I mentioned, we are now pivoting into not just interviewing and bringing SC leaders and top world-class SCs on this podcast. We're also trying to bring founders and CEOs of companies that are investing in innovation. And every time I bring these founders, I always thank them personally because them building these solutions that are purpose-built for sales engineering only validates our profession more. So with that, I'm very excited to welcome Ben Hills, the CEO and founder of Iris, the AI-first RFP automation platform. Ben, thank you for welcome to the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, Ben. When I was doing preparation for this podcast, I was looking up your LinkedIn profile and I was looking for when did Ben become a sales engineer and climbed up the ranks and experienced this challenge with RFPs. I think you've heard enough that SCs have a love-hate relationship with RFPs. So this episode is going to be very interesting for many. But when did you first learn about sales engineering?
So for 10 years, I was leading an ed tech company where I oversaw the sales team, the marketing team, the product team. I was chief operating officer, and we didn't have any full-time sales engineers. So I was the single person who was doing all of the demos, proposal development, RFP writing, response to security questionnaires. And when you're selling to colleges and universities, 100% of your sales cycles require some type of really high quality artifact that requires a lot of really dense subject matter expertise and institutional knowledge. So it was at that company and in scaling that company from 0 to 100 employees, 100 million students, and thousands of colleges on our platform where I was the only sole sales engineer supporting over 30 sales reps in all of their sales cycles.
That's a pretty massive ratio, but that's why I didn't see it on your LinkedIn profile because you were ghost playing the sales engineering role.
I was aware of the profession and actually aware of it more as like sales enablement, like more aware of sales enablement than sales engineering specifically. And the way I'd structure my team was such that I had 4 product marketing managers that all owned a line of business. And one of their responsibilities was also doing demos, being a subject matter expert, training the sales reps how to run demos, but also being on calls to do those demos themselves. So those product marketing managers were like the closest thing to the SE profession. Now, we had always planned to bring on dedicated SEs once we hit a certain size and scale. The company ended up getting acquired before we hit that scale. But I had always thought of SEs as a hire you make once you're at like 100 or more quota-bearing sales reps.
So Ben, tell me what inspired you to think about solving this RFP problem for sales engineers?
Yeah, I love crafting solutions when I was in ed tech. And you mentioned earlier on that RFPs are a really contentious word in the SE space, a love-hate
Yes.
relationship. And I actually loved being a part of understanding my buyer, understanding the strategic goal of a college, understanding my own platform's capabilities, and sort of amalgamizing all of that different information and thinking about how we could position our business by putting our best foot forward. And so one of the things that clicked for me was all of the existing approach to solving the RFP problem. We're just about recycling previously used content and automating your way through it as quickly as possible. But none of them actually focused on putting your best foot forward. And none of them actually said, hey, wait a minute, what would it look like to actually craft the best narrative in every sales cycle for every prospect based on my most up-to-date product information, based on my latest product roadmap, my latest case studies, my latest client stories, my latest marketing collateral. So one of the things that was exciting to me about solving the challenge or getting in the SE space and solving this RFP challenge was I felt really compelled to try to flip the narrative from RFPs are something everyone hates to RFPs are something that we can actually use to our advantage. The second thing that made it really compelling was from a macro standpoint, an increasing number of industries were shifting toward RFPs as the predominant procurement vehicle. So today, there's about $10 trillion in the US just in the private sector every year transacted via RFPs, and that number continues to grow. And so from is this worth starting a business standpoint, it checked that sort of box of like, hey, there's a really big opportunity here. There's 5 million companies doing RFPs manually. They're getting more complex every year. It's not just RFPs anymore. It's also security reviews and DDQs and all this. So the complexity and scope and size of the challenge was increasing. And then the third was the technology. The first time I used AI tools and had my ChatGPT moment and sort of built prompts, it dawned on me that we finally had the technology at our fingertips to learn from unstructured data and contextualize that in a way that was really special and unique. Come from the SaaS world and building enterprise SaaS, I understood that almost all software was relational databases and hard-coded fields, right? But what was new with all of the technology we could now build with was vector databases allowing us to use unstructured data, and then LLMs allowing us to synthesize that. So it fell into this category of what I call bringing a Jetsons era solution to a Flintstones era problem, where there was no shortage of people who felt the pain, but there was a real first time opportunity to solve this pain in a new way with this new technology. So all three of those things together, one, I felt like I had a unique perspective on RFPs actually being an opportunity, not just a bad word that no one wants to hear.
Yeah.
Two, a growing number of people needing to rely on this workflow. And three, a brand new technology that could finally solve this challenge in the way that I'd always envisioned it.
That's great. And I can totally resonate with all three of those points, especially being the last one.
Yeah.
So if you have the AI kind of doing most of the legwork of defining this RFP and fulfilling this RFP and responding, like you said, with most compelling answers, what a great use of this new technology. Now, one of the things that many listeners would say is the reason a lot of SC teams don't put a lot of emphasis on RFPs versus when you look at preparation for a demo, SCs would spend hours, right, trying to personalize. And the common objection I have seen and heard is you don't know if the buyer is looking at your RFP and how much are they actually reading the responses that you've provided. So there's this, can you put in all this effort and somebody's just going to weigh your RFP compared to some other vendors and say, you know what, this one looks better or nicer and I'm just going to pay attention to that? Is it just a column fodder or a checkbox from the buyer journey? It's also interesting to hear from your perspective that the procurement process is evolving to include more RFPs than less, because there may be narrative out there that says RFPs are dead, gone, who's sending out these long documents that nobody reads. But what's your perspective on the trend that you're seeing from a buyer's perspective, that companies are actually leveraging these documents to maybe streamline their buyer process and their evaluation process?
Yeah, there are a couple of really interesting nuggets of data and research that's coming out about why there are more RFPs. And there are companies I talk to who will say, we had 0% of our revenue flow through RFPs 3 years ago, and today 98% flows through RFPs. And these are multi-billion-dollar companies. We have companies that say, hey, we never got asked to do an RFP on renewal, but all of a sudden this year, 50% of our renewals required an RFP. And so there's only nascent research as to why, right? Like some surveys to a few hundred or a few thousand companies asking them. But it basically breaks down to this. One, buyers are getting a lot smarter and sharper. And many buyers, when they had a lot of money during the ZERP pandemic era, just bought lots of tools. And a lot of those tools are now coming up for renewal cycles, right? They're coming up on their 3-year contract, and it's causing buyers to say, hey, wait a minute. I know that I want a tool in this space. I know I want to solve this problem. I know I want a solution, but now I have a much better sense of exactly what I'm looking for. The features and functions, the way it gets implemented. So one part is just heightened buyer expectations. They're coming up for renewals at the end of a tech cycle, and they actually have a better sense of what they're looking for and what they want. The other is industries are still just moving digital, right? I think a lot of times we get trapped in the B2B SaaS world where everyone is using the latest technology all of the time. But for many industries, like take telecom and customer support, for instance, many of those industries are just now upgrading their phone systems from being hardwired telephony to cloud-based dialers, or insurance brokers moving from fax machines to digital systems. So there are still many, many industries that are just adopting technology pretty much for their first time. And for them, where they're adopting critical technology that is managing the most important services in what they do, they were always going to use an RFP for what they're buying. It's just now that it's technology that they're buying.
Is there an element of the cost of going through an RFP process going down? Because that's one of the other objections I heard. Like if I'm a business owner and I know I need a technology solution, I can either just start doing Gartner report or my own research to say, hey, who are the top 3 or 4 players in this
Yeah.
space? And then start doing some discovery conversations to start seeing demos versus if I need to start an RFP process, I got to sit down and figure out what questions I need to ask all these vendors. And
Yeah.
oftentimes that company would go and hire an agency to say, come help us do this evaluation. So you go figure out what the RFP format is, what questions we should be asking. And then you help us once the answers start coming in, you help us identify, hey, out of these 7 responses that we got, 3 of these companies that we want to, select as finalists that we want to go through an entire sales cycle with. Are you seeing a change in that behavior?
I think it's generally less expensive to run a tight RFP process than to either have to do all of the evaluation manually or make the wrong decision. I mean, making the wrong decision on a vendor because you're hasty or moved quickly is often more costly than some upfront work in the RFP process. And so if you think about in the PR space, you're a company, you want a PR agency, you can either set up 10 to 20 demos, hear all their pitches, read all their proposals, and decide which you like best. Or you can issue an RFP saying, here's a little bit about our company. Here's why we're looking for a PR agency. Here's what we're willing to spend. Submit your proposal by this deadline and we'll get back to you. I also think that there's quite a bit of community in the issuing of the RFP side. So like, it's actually a really good use case of off-the-shelf LLMs is like, hey, I'm looking to buy RFP automation software. Help me write the RFP that I should issue and generate 20 questions. And like, when you do some of that Googling, there are so many blogs and community forums and people are really comfortable sharing the pros and cons of their own RFP process and what they learn. I also think, generally speaking, it's the case that an RFP is an opportunity to speak directly to your buyer in a way that you might not otherwise have the opportunity to. And I learned this firsthand in ed tech, where sure, people would say, don't respond to the RFP because it wasn't baked for us, or we don't know the buyer, so on and so forth. But we multiple times were able to move the entire buying and procurement cycle away from the vendor who it seemed like it was baked for and in our favor because they're actually, particularly in the public sector, legally obligated to read every word of every RFP submission. And so you do have a really unique opportunity to shape the perspective of the audience and the buyer and really say like, hey, look, you asked for this. Here's a really good way to think about accomplishing that using our technology, our solution, so on and so forth.
That's really interesting because you're spot on. Like anytime we sold to government or regulated industries, it was expected that there will be a long procurement, RFP process. But a lot of the smaller players didn't. And I've known of tech companies that simply reject and, they'll disqualify a prospect if an RFP comes in because they know that in the current environment, the cost of the SC resources and internal resources to fill out that RFP. Sometimes people also feel that they've already made up a decision, but because they have to look at 5 different platforms, they are issuing this RFP just to check the box of the process. But I think the way you were explaining, Ben, it dawned on me that it really can be an efficient disqualification process from a buyer's perspective. Because if I'm talking to 5 companies and I'm scheduling demos with them, right? Even for demos, there's 5 different discovery conversations, right? And I'm then scheduling between who's going to do what demo. And most people don't just want to hear me in the demo. They want me to invite the other stakeholders. Now there's multiple employees in my company that have to be involved in these 5 or 7 sales cycles versus if done right, I define what are the big things that I care about, what are the big drivers, what are the must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves. To your point, price, right? I can be open about budgets and things like that. And then I let people respond to it. And then based on their responses, it's kind of like interviewing. You look at the resume, the cover letter, and then just based on that, you are able to disqualify certain people out and you be selective on who you actually want to talk to.
Spot on.
And so that's really interesting. And so you're seeing that more and more, not just enterprise and government, more and more businesses are starting to use RFP as a mechanism to early stage qualify and disqualify potential prospects that they want to talk to.
Yes. And another underlying factor of that is there's a lot of data that's pointing toward people want to do async understanding and research of the company. And so some companies approach that by putting more information out there, right? You can do a free trial of a product. You can watch a demo video of a product. You can understand everything without talking to a sales rep. Other companies have decided to swing the opposite direction and just gate more frequently and say, you know what? I know I have a higher win rate if I can get in front of the prospect. So I'm just going to make it harder to learn about me without taking a meeting and a demo. And that leaves buyers really frustrated. And so their response is, you said, I don't really want to do 5 discovery calls and then run through 5 vendors' own specific sales cycles and own processes. I want to tell you what I'm looking for. I'm going to tell you what I want. And you come put your best foot forward. And as vendors, I think we actually do a disservice to our buyers by poo-pooing the RFP process.
Yeah.
Right? Like basically a buyer saying, enough is enough. I don't want to be sold to. I want to be shown and demonstrated value based on my criteria, on my schedule. And vendors are like, well, I don't have the resources to respond to an RFP, so you can't work with me. And there's a really interesting thread of this too, which is that does sometimes leave buyers to have a lower quality pool of potential vendors. When you talk to people, particularly in the public sector, they'll say, we want to streamline our RFP process so that high quality vendors will want to work with us, right? Now we can't just like get rid of requirements, but we do want the best vendors to come work with us. And I think as far as business size, it really depends on the industry. Only see RFPs at the largest enterprises that are, publicly traded companies and regulated at a really high degree of scrutiny. There are other industries where even if it's a small business, they'll still issue an RFP because they either were screwed by a vendor in the past. And so they feel like, hey, I already did the 3 martini lunch approach to buying from a vendor of whoever schmoozed me the most. Now I want to actually think about it, or just because it actually takes less time and it's easier.
So if done right, it sounds like this can be a really good, it's a win-win for both buyer and the vendor. And I think that's where comes the AI. So obviously you're an AI first platform.
Yes.
What are some benefits you've seen that you're able to and Iris is able to deliver on both the buying and the selling journey? Because I think you started off with making this statement earlier on, which is oftentimes it's copy and paste. And if the SC teams are restricted and there's an RFP due and there's a deadline, you're literally just looking at the bank of the Q&A library that you have. And oftentimes your RFP responses are as good as how updated that library is and actually who's maintaining that library. I've gone through different teams where we've had RFP managers and other teams where SCs did RFPs. I'll tell you personally, when I was an SC, I actually enjoyed working on RFPs because one, it changed the scenery a little bit because, it's kind of sit in front of a laptop and, knock out an RFP. But most importantly, to me, the prospect that I filled out an RFP for, my demo and every interaction with them was so much more insightful because after I was done with the RFP, I was like, I know you guys. I know what you're asking about.
100%.
And I'm going to bring all of that into my presentation. It's like how much more personalized it can be when I've just filled out a 200 question RFP for what you're looking for, right? But oftentimes, because the RFP process is so time intensive, right? Senior SCs would say, look, a junior SC or an RFP person should fill it out, give it to me, and then I'll just skim through it. And I think you lose that in-depth awareness and understanding of what this prospect is looking for.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, you hit the nail on the head. What more could you ask for as a vendor than the buyer telling you exactly what they're going to judge you on and exactly the timeline for which you'll be judged, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a gift to most people because most of the time the hardest challenge is understanding the true underlying needs and expectations of the buyer. So it's like a great thing that they're like, hey, just so you know, here are the 50 things I care about, and here's when you can tell me, and here's when I'll make a decision.
We go through so much of, psychology to ask, what are your pain
just
points?
To find out what do you really give a shit about.
That's right. What do you really care about? And in this RFP, the first page is usually, hey, these are the 5 themes we're really interested in doing more on, right? So
Yep. Now, you mentioned very common to have junior SEs do the first draft, then get passed up. Okay, I think some of that's starting to go away. We're at a point now where 2/3 of enterprise sales are requiring an RFP or some equivalent type of work, right? It might be a statement of work, it might be a sole source document, but it might be a proposal or a business case, but it's requiring, again, something that's really dense in institutional knowledge and has to be shaped to the particular prospect you're speaking to. And there are companies that are 30,000 employee publicly traded companies and 3 employee startups and everything in between. It's really common to have the exec team involved in the final review of RFPs, particularly for some high quality, high dollar deals. So what
Right.
we try to do is shift left the subject matter expertise. Instead of waiting until the team's gone through 30, 40 hours of writing a draft and getting 9 individual people reviewing and revising it, and then it gets to the CEO and chief product officer's desk, and then they're like, wait a minute, you're missing out on some key information. We unlock that subject matter expertise really early on so that the first draft can be far more accurate and far more relevant. Now, I'll tell you a story about one of our largest clients. They sell threat detection hardware and software to everyone from a hospital system to a Navy submarine. And they were one of the first users of Iris. They have all 300 sales reps using our product on a daily basis today. Sales reps save about 10 hours a week. SEs managing an RFP save 30 to 40 hours per RFP. And when they did a proof of concept, their co-founder and chief operating officer read the executive summary that Iris had generated in their test and said, oh my gosh, Iris analogized a quote I made in a press release, capability of my product, and then wove that into some client case studies. The level of comprehension of context is unparalleled. No human on my team could keep this much context top of mind when writing an RFP, but of course an AI system could. And that's the real key in what makes Iris special. The amount of context that Iris is able to surface and contextualize for every RFP means that you're not just getting something recycled faster, you're actually getting a higher quality set of content generated with a much deeper, richer, more accurate set of information. And that's what people see the light bulb moment for AI with Iris, which is like, wait a minute. Now I know if I'm talking to a prospect who is in a certain region, I can reference other similar clients. If they're really apprehensive about certain functionality and excited about others, I can prioritize that and talk differently. When you talk to many SEs, they'll say, if I could put the time into it, I would write in a different style and tone for each prospect based on what I know about them. And that's just not something a human could do, but a human with Iris can manage and can do. And that's why we love SE so much, because they're obsessed with their products, they're obsessed with their customers, and they want to craft a high quality narrative and put their best foot forward. And by being the managers of our system, they're able to execute on their vision of high quality content without needing to work 400 hours a week, which is just not even possible, right?
I like your move to the shift because it's interesting. I would have SC teams and sales teams that are working on an RFP with a massive brand, a potential big prospect. But because it's just an RFP, it stays in this very hidden stage because nobody wants to give visibility into, look, we're going to submit an RFP. We could be a column fodder. But oftentimes, if an exec CEO walking by asks you, what are you working on? You said this RFP. They're like, I should know that we're at least engaging with this brand. So if you can bring visibility into execs at a higher level on who we're actually interacting with, that can completely shift the dynamic and their involvement in the process earlier on as well.
Absolutely.
Totally makes sense how AI can help with both, like you said, if it has context about other prospects, the regional nuances and things like that. So you're really kind of leveling the playing field because in most companies I've seen the RFP response, just like a presentation or demo or success rates, right? Depends so much on who the AE and the SE are working on. And do they have, historical knowledge, contextual knowledge? Have they worked on similar RFPs in the past? If that's the case, their response is going to be better. But by leveraging Iris is that everybody gets that same level of expertise and context
Exactly right.
to the RFP response. So I like that a lot.
That's exactly right.
You get to work with a lot of SEs, and I can see that you're passionate about the SE teams and people and the profession. Any trends then you're observing as you're engaging with these leaders and teams around what are top of mind for them? Of course, you're helping them with knowledge management, with this new wave of buying process, the way I'm understanding it. What are some other trends you're observing in this day? And also, if there's an element of, having started and scaling an AI first company, what is it like to sell an AI first platform versus other platforms that are catching up on AI?
Absolutely. So one, SEs, the exact right people to champion AI rollouts within their company. And I think the reason why is because they are one of the two most cross-functional roles within an organization. And when I talk to people at companies, big, small, medium, et cetera, the two roles that spend more time with other teams than anyone else are SEs and product managers or product marketing managers if a company is that specialized. And because AI is really good at ingesting unstructured data from different systems and synthesizing that, it makes sense that the people who exist in the friction between the gears of an organization are most ripe to benefit from not just using AI tools themselves, but also force multiplying their highest quality, least scalable work across the organization. So one thing with SE teams that I speak with is they just love getting to be the ones to try tools to help scale their team in all different kinds of ways and directions. And it makes sense. Think about all the SEs you know. They're creative, they're tech savvy, they're really intellectually
Intellectually
curious.
curious, yes.
They fit all of the right criteria for like, let me be the one to try a lot of new things and champion it internally. Now, you mentioned early on that there's a huge focus in AI on time savings,
Hmm.
right? And for years, the headlines have been about reducing time on customer support, reducing time on lead gen, reducing time on qualification, reducing. What I talk with SEs about, and what a lot of them want to do is forget about cutting out the time on the work that kind of sucks. I want to do more of the work that's just not scalable, but has really high outcomes. RFPs are a good example. Writing proposals and business cases are a good example. Creating custom demo environments are a good example. And so when you look at the work that people say, you know what, when I put the time into this, it clearly demonstrates ROI, better win rates, faster deal cycles, higher dollars. But it's not possible to do this in every deal cycle. That's where AI has the most opportunity with SEs, and that's where SEs are most excited, is not just cutting out the work I don't like, but actually enabling me to do more of the work I do like and scaling that outward. I think many SEs don't love that oftentimes they're only able to work on a subset of the total deals happening across their sales team, either the highest dollar, the most urgent, and everything else is just left to using their templated off the shelf work. But with AI, we now see SEs be able to take control and work with AEs on full lifecycle deals. The other part is getting able to work better with other teams, right? SEs now can work more with the product team on what they're hearing on calls and how that translates into roadmap objectives. They can work more with the account management and post-sales team on what they're hearing and how to make those clients successful. So all to say, what am I hearing with SEs? One, of course, where can I use AI to be helpful? And where can I use AI to force multiply? But two, how can I spend more time with more parts of the organization and actually take all of this knowledge I've absorbed as a sponge and disseminate that across more teams?
That's really interesting, and you're right. Like, it's across every company. It's the SCs trying to figure out, and there's some pressure too, right? It's like every company is trying to figure out, if they're not AI first, how are they incorporating AI into either their selling motion, their customer service motion, and SCs are always, we all want to stay ahead of the game, and we want to
For sure.
we want to be trusted advisors, we want to be thought leaders, and finding good uses of AI that are not just, to your point, saving time, but adding more value is really important. Any lessons that you have seen in scaling an AI first platform? I mean, obviously your edtech platform, you mentioned it was SaaS and, working with government, things like that. That was not AI first. Anything that you've observed as a founder CEO that you're able to move things at a much faster pace, or what's been your observation?
Yeah, I'll give two almost directly competing observations. One is no matter how cool AI is to me, and no matter how fast AI is moving, change management and the pace at which the world moves is still something you just can't control. And an early investor and mentor of mine talks about the physics of business. And it's true. In every technology cycle, people would say like everything is going to happen way faster, and some things do, but adopt technology, change management still takes time, right? I mean, we are disrupting what for many companies is the most critical business process they have, and it impacts every single employee. So even if one champion is like, Iris is how I want to do it, there's still just a natural inertia of rolling that out, seeing the results and the actual change management component of it. The other and competing notion of that is as a founder and the way that my business can scale and run, AI has changed the entire way that I forecast the roles that I need to hire.
Mm,
It's certainly changed what I look for when I hire people. And I hear this from other, even CROs and SE leaders, where almost every candidate they're interviewing now is asking which AI tools they can use in their job. Think about it. 20 years ago, if you got your CPA and one accounting firm said, of course, we do everything on pen and paper, not Excel. And another said on your first day, you get a laptop with Excel, which firm do you think would be a long liner? So we wouldn't be able to attract high quality talent if we were telling people they can't use AI. My last company was in the mobile space. And it was similar in that we were bringing mobile technology to colleges, universities for the first time. So there's a lot of change management components. There were two times a year that there were major leapfrogs in capabilities in mobile. Apple's developer conference and Google's developer conference. You got a new operating system, a new device, all that. AI is continuous development.
yeah.
Literally every day, there are leapfrogs in the underlying foundational tech that causes our team to rethink all of the capabilities in our solution. And so one of the muscles we've had to build is continuous experimentation and actually carving out dedicated resources to say we need to test everything at the tip of the spear and really quickly determine whether or not it's something we're going to integrate, and if so, how that's going to impact our clients. And that's been one of the most exhilarating parts about starting a business in this tech revolution.
That's got to change, right? Going from product development roadmap where you've got to lock down the next 18 months so you can, product managers can start providing the specs to engineers and developers to go build. And long gone are those 18-month lockdowns. That's, what
Yeah,
you decided last quarter, you got to reassess and say, is that still true? Are our assumptions based on how we're going to build these capabilities or how are we going to
exactly right.
scale still true? So it's got to be exhilarating, but exciting at the same time. So,
For sure. And look, it's customers who benefit, right? Like,
yeah.
and I remind people all the time, customers and end users benefit from the fact that there's heightened scrutiny and expectation from builders and vendors like me. There's an opportunity to make software better at a rapid pace. And I think it's a good thing. There's less opportunity to have crappy software and still be a successful company today than there was 10 years ago during the SaaS boom. And I think that's a net positive for the world.
I love your t-shirt, Ben. Thank you for being on the
Thank you.
podcast, because I think whoever's listening to this versus watching it, Ben's wearing a I love RFPs t-shirt.
Yes.
I think summary of this podcast and this session, Ben, I'm taking away is RFPs can be a great thing. They can be a great thing for buyers, for vendors, for SEs. I think if we brush off all the archaic ways we have always done RFPs and the value and the ROI that we've seen from RFP investment and rethink in this new era of AI, this can really be a differentiator on how companies, this can be a big driver for go-to-market, even for vendors. So I
Yeah,
appreciate you sharing great insights, your perspective on scaling and launching Iris. Thank you for being on the podcast. It was a great conversation.
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.